Alright, what's up, y'all? My name is Evan Strong, the founder of In the Image Clothing Company. Today is the 18th of June 2026. This is a video under In the Image Clothing Company Poodles, and the title of this video is The Proper Nut Width on Guitars. Okay, we're going to talk about this because, well, In the Image Clothing Company, what are we, who are we? Our slogan on our main side, one of our fourths, is allowing the body to work, okay? And how we allow the body to work is in all the ways, okay? Eating, sleeping, standing, walking, sitting, breathing, hydration, everything. We just discuss under In the Image Clothing Company and just not altering our bodies. But with our bodies just having the shape and length of the bones determining how they work, and the body couldn't do anything else ever, truly. We discuss sizing and setup of guitars as one of the things we do under In the Image Clothing Company music here, along with making a lot of music, geared around the gospel of Jesus Christ with the messages were designed in the image of God. In the image of Jesus Christ, right? That's where our clothing company name comes in the Image Clothing Company, our 5-word company name. To not alter the body. We're doing everything in our lives in and through the literal wording of whatever you choose to clothe your body with. So, sizing and setup of guitars is one of those big things, okay? If we're playing guitar, we can't be altering our hands. If we're making videos, we can't be having too much surrounding sounds, okay? Alright, so I don't play steel strings personally. I just don't. I do crazy things with nylon strings, as I say. Okay, Evan Strong. Here's the thing. Let's talk about nut width. What is this? What does it mean? What does it mean? And let's say it a third time. What does this mean? Nut width, this is the nut of a guitar. Up here, right below the top, where the tuning parts of the guitar are, the tuning pegs, tuning knobs, tuning gears, tuning barrels. Okay, nylon strings, they'll have barrels that go across usually. Steel strings usually will have these little pegs coming out the sides with a knob on them and a gear coming through the headstock. Wow. Terminology. Okay, here's the thing. The nut is this little part right at the top of the neck of the guitar where it meets the headstock of the guitar. Okay. And it's usually plastic or bone or some kind of composite material, but it could be anything that it could be. Now, this little nut is where the strings come up, and then they have this slight little break angle over the nut, okay? And that's where the top end of the strings is supported. The bottom end of the strings on the guitar is supported down here at what's called the saddle. It's usually made out of the same material or a similar type of material, okay? Placed at the bottom end of the string distance. You could call it the scale length, okay? Yeah. So, here's the thing. If we have our nut of our guitar at a certain width, it's going to determine how wide the neck of the guitar is. Now, what you've got is a left hand. And if you're right-handed, living in this right-handed world, okay, 85%, give or take, 90% maybe, of human beings are right-handed across the earth in 2026. Today's the 18th of June, okay? Yeah. If you are using your left hand on the neck of the guitar, on the fretboard, okay, where all these frets are, little things that go across the neck to where you can know where you're at, up or down the neck, okay? Usually little metal things in the neck where you can stop the string vibration at, right? Yeah, anyway, the width of the nut of the guitar, it matters because the width of your hands is however wide your hands are individually, okay? We talk about allowing the body to work. as is our slogan, under the main side of In The Image Clothing Company. And if we don't allow our bodies to be able to mesh with things in life, by setting the things in life up for how our bodies just already work, because the body just grows by itself and it only could ever possibly do what it does, just determined by the shape and length of the bones, and then muscles only pulling. Okay, there's only one way the human body could ever possibly function. Yeah, don't believe me, but we get into the anatomy of it in depth under In The Image Clothing Company, specifically under our main side. When it comes to playing guitar, you're doing so many fine little motor skills, okay, little movements with your fingers. So much is happening with your fingers. I mean, taking your fingers from here to here to here to here, and your whole shoulder, you know, the hand is the shoulder. Hey, Mr. Guitar Man, says the airplane pilot. Everything we're doing with our fingers, there's only the amount of room on this neck that there is for the fingers to do all of this motion they're doing. No matter what you're doing with your fingers, you have to have your whole arm working together. The hand is the shoulder. When we straighten the elbow between the hand and the shoulder will do the exact same thing, right? The neutral wrist straight out from the outside of that pinky finger when we just travel down the outside of the forearm. Okay, so we need to keep these neutrals in the guitar. So we talk about guitar setup a lot under In The Image Clothing Company music here, but a big part of this is little things, right? In life, it's always the little things, like cutting my head off in the frame of this camera. It's the little things, okay? The width of the nut of the guitar actually determines the entire neck of the guitar down to the body of the guitar. Well, I mean, really farther, all the way down to the bottom of the fretboard. Sometimes you've got guitars that have a cutout here where the body's actually cut out of the guitar, so you can get your hand all the way up to the very upper frets of the fretboard, you know, the highest sounding notes, okay? But the nut's determining that width, because that's where the strings are sitting in place to then string down the fretboard's length, okay? So what happens is, this can be a different width. You know, and I wrote down on here 1 inch and 11/16, and I marked it out. And then I wrote down 1 inch and 7/8. Okay, now that's standard measurement, but metric, that would be, yeah, somewhere like 44-ish, 43 to 48 millimeters, you know. 1 and 11/16 is probably right around 43 millimeters, give or take. And then 1 and 7/8 is right around 48 millimeters, give or take, okay. Now, or right around 50 millimeters. Anyway, the conversion's what it is. You can do the conversion yourself from standard to metric measurement. But the big point is, you've got nut widths that are anywhere from, I mean, they can get as narrow as they can get, but 1 and 11/16 up to over 2 inches, and anywhere in between there, and really just any size you could possibly get. So I don't play steel strings, as I was saying, you know, and as you know, if you know me at all musically, Evan Strong. But I'm showing you with this guitar. This is the guitar that I have access to right now. With nylon strings, or any strings that are thicker than how thin you can get steel strings, just because steel strings are so durable and strong that you can get them really thin, and then you have a thinner string, and so you can have a narrower neck or a narrower nut width, essentially, because you don't have to have as much room in between each string for your fingers if the string itself is pretty narrow. Like the diameter of the string, the actual width of the string itself, each of the 6 strings on a 6-string guitar, okay? So having a nut width that's somewhere around 1 11/16 of an inch on a steel string guitar could be very similar to having a nut width that's somewhere around 1 7/8 on a nylon string guitar. It could be because the width of the string takes up more width on the guitar. And don't take the measurements that I'm saying in this as exact. Okay, but to give an understanding on, we've got string width, we've got nut width, and then we've got our fingers width, or our hand width, and we've got the length of our arms, which that plays into it as well. You know, the longer arms you have, that determines where your hand's just going to naturally go to the fretboard when your elbows are just hanging with gravity down at your side, you know. And so there's a lot to the sizing and setup of guitar, but with the nut width, it's one of those things where to a degree it's individual, because some people have really thick fingers, really wide fingers, okay? Some people have really thin fingers, really narrow fingers. And some people have a lot of airplanes that fly overhead. Yikes! Let me play something. Okay. I understand the surrounding sounds, okay? I get it. You've got different width fingers, you've got different width strings, you've got different width nut on your guitar, which makes a different width neck of the entire guitar. Okay. Now, really ideally, we want the saddle width down here at the bottom of the strings to be as close as we can to the same as the nut width up here at the top of the strings, so then you're having even spaced fingers from left to right hand. Okay, that's a big deal. But with the nut width, we just want our fingers to be able to comfortably be placed on the neck of the guitar. You want to be able to just bend your fingers and have them just fit well on the neck of the guitar. But we've got to realize we are not putting our fingers ever, really, just straight across the neck of the guitar. Because our hand comes under the neck. Oh my airplanes. I haven't been in this town for about a month and a half, and there's just so many airplanes. It's ridiculous. There's an airport, right? Just a couple miles from here. So when your hand comes underneath the neck of the guitar, your hand comes in a way where your fingers are actually on an angle on the neck. And so your fingers take up less width on an angle on the neck. Like if I just take my hand here and just put it under the neck of the guitar like I'm going to play the guitar, and I just close my fingers in, you know, just bend my fingers and place them onto the neck of the guitar, they don't even span the whole width of the neck, just because they're not completely straight on the fretboard. But if I were to put my fingers just completely like perpendicular, you know, on the fretboard, just right in line with the frets, all the tips of my fingers would actually be wider than the neck of the guitar. My fingers would actually be wider than this video's title and the reason for this explanation, the nut width of the guitar. You know, all my fingers right next to each other on the tips. But that just doesn't actually happen because you can't even get there. There's a neck of the guitar in the way, your arm's going underneath. So the thing is, we don't need a nut width of a guitar that's actually the width of our fingers completely, okay? We will actually need a neck width and a nut width of a guitar to be slightly narrower than our fingers. And let me explain why. Not only do we need enough width so that we can just have our fingers tracking right next to each other, right? Right. Just right in line, and we can play guitar and our fingers can just nicely clear each other, and all the bones, tendons, muscles, ligaments can just move right in line. You know, you can look straight from the elbow all the way down and out the end of the fingers. The muscles go through the whole forearm. So we want our fingers to track as in line as we possibly can have them track. in all of our life, right? There's that neutral position to the entire body, okay? But if we have the nut width too narrow, you're gonna have to be like crossing your fingers over each other. And it'll take your shoulder out of a position that's normal as well, right? The shoulder's neutral position will be changed if the wrist's neutral position is changed, or even if the finger's neutral position is changed. The body's all connected. It's a kinetic chain, right? A chain of bones that just gets pulled on by musculature, and muscles only pull directly in line. And so when we're playing guitar, we probably want the nut width to be slightly narrower than if we just put our fingers all across it. As you can see, my fingers are a little bit wider than the nut width of the guitar, but that's a good thing because we're going to be on a slight angle, and now they're about the same width, right? Or even still slightly smaller, really. I mean, in my case, yeah, it's probably still going to be slightly smaller. Slightly narrower at your finger width than the width of the nut of the guitar, which determines the neck width of the guitar, because we're just on that angle, and then it's just not quite as wide. So we don't want the nut width too narrow, because otherwise we're just going to be trying to cross our fingers over each other, and now they can't move. They'll just hit into each other. If they're trying to get so close together to squeeze onto a really small nut width of a guitar, and this is relative, like I'm saying, this is from individual to individual. We've got different size hands, different length of fingers and different width of fingers. Yeah, I mean, just different proportions to our bodies in general, even though the bones are the same, right? Shape. They are different lengths and slightly different proportions, okay, where they are. So we don't want the neck too narrow. Picture playing a ukulele. Like, I'm 6'2" tall for reference. I've got pretty big hands. I'm just larger than average human being in most all ways, physically, proportions wise. So, right, one size fits the really tall guy. An episode of In the Image Clothing Company podcast. Just meaning we live in the same world, this man-made world placed onto God's natural earth. A lot of products are designed to try to be one size fits all, but sometimes it's one size fits maybe someone if it works pretty well for them, right? But everyone's so individual in the ways that they are that we can't just have one nut width of guitars. And so that's what I'm saying. We've got nut widths that are quite a bit narrower than this, really, relatively quite a bit, and then nut widths that are quite a bit wider than this, okay, relatively. Probably within like a half an inch difference, give or take, at the most, on either end, give or take. But that's really quite a bit, because that's like a whole finger width, yeah, give or take. So what I'm saying is, we need to have the right width of the nut on our guitar. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to play very well. You can be the best guitarist on the planet Earth, and sure, you can probably play just about anything pretty well. That doesn't mean your hands aren't going to cramp up and your forearms, and that doesn't mean it's not going to be uncomfortable, either on the narrow end of something like the nut width, for example, of you having your fingers hitting into each other because they're trying to just scrunch into a small spot. And again, it travels up through the shoulder and through the whole body, from the shoulder to the spine, down to the tips of the toes, out to the tips of the fingers, through the jaw, stabilizing the entire body, going through the collars of our tops, right? We are a clothing company, in the Image Clothing Company, to allow the body to work. Okay, seriously. And the nut, narrower than it should be, will cause you to squeeze your fingers all together, like playing a ukulele. That's what I was saying, right? I've played ukulele quite a bit, for a few years of my life. I love ukulele, okay? I love the instrument. I love the simplicity of it. I love the sound of it. I play nylon string guitars anyway, so it's a very similar thing. That's actually what got me into playing guitar, is playing ukulele first. But my hands are too big for most all ukuleles, just meaning the width of my actual knuckles, the width of the bones of my actual hands. And there's nothing you can possibly do technique-wise to change the shape and length of your bones, you know. This is what we discuss under In the Image Clothing Company. Mr. Car, man, so many cars going by. I could film these videos anywhere, okay? You're never gonna do anything besides what your body can do in your life. It only does what it does. And so, what we have to do is find the best nut width for our own hands. Because this is the thing. What's discouraging people from playing guitars? Why is it hard for certain people to play guitars? Why does it seem like certain people have such a hard time getting into playing guitar, even if they seem like they're pretty naturally good at something like this? Well, a lot of it's setup and a lot of it's sizing of guitars. A lot of it's their clothing on their own physical, personal bodies. A lot of it's patterning in their own bodies, you know, living in this right-handed world. There's a lot going into it, you know. But yeah, even the jaw, you know, that's a huge thing. The nut width is one of those things alone that'll just change your entire guitar playing experience, and it can make it just about, like, not able to even happen. Okay? So on the small end, we've discussed it. You're cramping your fingers together, and your fingers just can't open and close if they're trying to cross over each other. You're hitting your own fingers into each other. But now we can also have on the other end of too small of a nut width, too wide of a nut width on a guitar, which will determine the width of the entire neck of the guitar. Okay, the entire fretboard, really. So if we have too wide of a nut width of a guitar, what we have is us spreading our fingers apart to try to get to things farther than we would just normally need to. You know, like I'm saying, when our fingers are on the fretboard, we just need the fingers to be able to track in line and just very nicely be able to clear each other, just like they're just going straight out and straight in, just right next to each other, without your fingers hitting into each other and restricting each other's motion, but also without trying to spread your fingers too wide, and then it hurts. Your bones are only the shape and length that they are. Muscles only pull directly in line. And so if you're someone with pretty small hands and you've got a wide guitar neck, it'll usually be a classical guitar or a nylon string guitar, because of the width of the strings, okay, is wider than steel strings are generally. And so you'll need a wider nut width and a wider neck width of your guitar to just have the same amount of spacing, or at least as much spacing between the strings. And then also nylon strings vibrate more than steel strings because they're not quite as stiff. So they have a lot more motion back and forth when you pluck a string. So they need that width to be able to vibrate and not hit into each other, like our fingers. They need the width of a nut width wide enough so the fingers don't hit into each other, but not too wide where we're spreading our fingers apart. Because if the nut width is too wide or the neck of the guitar is too wide, you're gonna have pain in your hands, and it's something you'll never fix. It's not gonna be possible for someone to give you like technique advice, or maybe someone says you just need to warm up more before you play guitar. We should never have to warm our bodies up before we do anything in life. Our bodies are either working or they're not. You know, we discuss stuff differently than most people say here under In the Image Clothing Company. We discuss it extremely thoroughly, and you have to look at the entire body as a whole and understand that it's just a mechanical machine. You know, it all only does what it does, and you just can't spread your finger bones or muscles or even your skin, you know, wider than you can without hurting your body, okay? So there's kind of that middle ground for a nut width of a guitar, and this is one of those things you just won't even know if you don't know, right? We just talk about under In the Image Clothing Company, you don't know what you don't know, you can't be held accountable for what you don't know, and so we've got to teach people things that they might need to know for their lives, for what they're doing. In guitars, for example, as just anything in life, if you're going to guitar stores and you're trying out guitars and trying to see what you could play that might work for you, if you play a few guitars, let's say you try like 5 different guitars in a guitar shop somewhere, okay, just hypothetically, and they're all just too narrow of a nut width for the width of your fingers, it's not going to feel comfortable no matter what. No matter what strings you put on it, no matter how you set things up, the angles of the nut or the saddle, the height of the strings off the fretboard, the tension of the strings, even type of strings. You've got nylon versus steel, and then whatever type of material you could make a string out of. Whatever, and whatever, everything. I mean, the wood of the guitar, the feel and the sound of the guitar, the size and the shape and the length of the guitar, everything could be tweaked. For you to try to figure out what you can do to make it feel comfortable for you. But if you don't address the width of the nut, everything else could be as perfect as it could be to match your own hands and arm length and height and preferences and sound, meshing with your body and how you sing and the tone of your voice if you sing while you play guitar and whatever. I'm just saying all the things we could possibly talk about with sizing and setup of guitar and things around that. The nut width is one of those things where if it's too narrow, you're going to cramp your hands up. Your fingers just can't get past each other, and you're hitting your own fingers into each other just to try to fret notes on the guitar. And it's going to hurt your shoulder, your neck, your head, your whole body. Okay, down to your feet, out to your fingers. I'm serious. Your whole body will be in pain, and it'll be just physically uncomfortable if the nut width's too narrow. But if the nut width's too wide, you're going to be stressing and straining your body. Your forearm's going to really hurt, and your fingers and your hand. Yeah, I mean, things will just bind up, and it's not a problem like you didn't warm up enough. There's no such thing really as getting your body to be able to just work the only way it possibly can, track the fingers in line. I mean, that's all it can ever do anyway. But if we're not allowing that to happen by the right sizing and setup of the whole instrument, but also just the sizing and setup of just simple things like the width of the nut, so that our fingers can just open and close at the hand, right, and track right next to each other, keeping that neutral wrist and just having room between the fingers to not hit into each other too narrow and not spread apart too wide. It'll travel through your whole body. So why I wrote these couple things down, I'm actually getting a new guitar here real soon, and I've had a hard time with this myself personally. Having a lot of guitars, I've had 21, 22 guitars, give or take, as of today's date, okay, the 18th of June, 2026. And I've done a lot with sizing and setup of guitars. I've done pretty much everything you can possibly do, like by myself too, So I've got a lot of hands-on experience, and that's a lot of reason why In The Image Clothing Company Music is one of our fourths under In The Image Clothing Company. But 1 7/8 inch width, okay, 1 inch and then another 7/8 of an inch, so just 1/8 of an inch under 2 inches wide is just about the ideal width of a nut for me personally, Evan Strong. And it's taken me a lot to figure that out, okay? Just as it's taken me a lot to figure out all the other things that are needed in guitar sizing and setups, just to not alter the whole body as we play guitars. As the founder of In The Image Clothing Company, this is a lot of what we do here, okay? And so what I'm saying is, no matter what any of us will ever try to do with guitars, if we just can't do this, like just imagine sitting here and you just are moving your fingers in and out, closing your fingers, opening your fingers, making a fist, and then just straightening your hand out, okay? Your fingers will just track right in line next to each other, with no resistance from the fingers hitting into the fingers, and no resistance from just the fingers spreading apart, and the bone joints actually binding up, and the skin being pulled on, and all through the forearm tension coming through all these muscles that stem into the fingers from the elbow, and then through the whole body. There's just that middle spacing. Not too narrow, not too wide. It's like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Not too hot and not too cold with the porridge in this story. Okay, I mean, that's really what it is in life, with everything that we have to mesh with our own individual bodies' proportions. It's just not too big, not too small, not too tall, not too short, not too wide, not too narrow, whatever it is, because our bodies are individual. And so you don't have too small of hands to play guitar in general, but you might need a guitar that's got quite a bit narrow nut width than you've been trying to play, maybe, if it was too wide. And you don't have too big of hands to squeeze your hands onto these guitar necks that might seem so small. You just probably need a wider guitar neck than what you've been trying to play, right? A wider nut width that determines the entire neck of the guitar's width, the whole fretboard's width. If what you were trying to play was just too narrow for your hands individually, right? So there's just some context, some information on what's going on there. And one of the biggest things to see, I'm just gonna hit it one more time. It's what I said earlier, is we are never, because you can't physically get your hand there because you wrap your hand under the neck of the guitar first. You'll never have a time when your fingers are all just right across the neck of the guitar, perpendicular with it. And so you don't just need to measure the width of your fingers and get a nut width that's that wide, because that's going to be probably too wide for you. Then as you're fretting things, you're going to have to be spreading your fingers farther apart than they would just naturally track in line. And you're going to hurt your hands. Right, Bird? The robin knows. The robin probably plays guitar. No, probably not. But, yeah, there you go, okay? That's a lot of it. So, yeah, my hands, good reference, understanding. I've got pretty big hands. And I would be comfortable, personally what I've found is, the most comfortable at a 1 7/8 inch wide nut width, which is actually right here, with this guitar specifically cabled on the 3rd fret, because guitars generally get a little bit wider at the neck as they come up to the higher notes. But like I said, we want it to be as even as we can on either side, from the nut to the saddle at the width, just for our hands to be even. But yeah, 1 7/8 is pretty much ideal for my pretty large hands. So you can take that and then kind of try to find your way from there with your own hand size and width of guitar nut and guitar neck sizing, okay? Most full-size guitars, as I've said many times, as the founder of In the Image Clothing Company is the point, with allowing the body to work being our slogan on our main side, they're too big. Okay, most full-size guitars are going to be too big for just about everybody ever. Okay, again, the literal wording of everybody who has one, or everyone who has a body. Every human being is who our information applies to under In the Image Clothing Company, within this universal human design, even within our differences within that. Okay, but here's the thing. I don't play full-size guitars. I'm 6'2" tall, maybe even taller than that, actually. I haven't measured myself for a long time. Okay. A lot of context behind that, but I'm serious. I say that just for the context, because there's a need to say that, seen with context, okay? But, I play somewhere around a half-size guitar to a 3/4 size guitar. And really half-size is probably even more ideal for me, and I'm pretty tall, okay? I've got pretty long arms. I've got pretty big hands, and we're just talking about physical proportions, moving our fingers and our hands across the strings of a guitar. But yeah, somewhere between 3/4 size and a half size, that's really what people need. When the body's working properly in its neutral positions, and we're just keeping our bodies aligned and just functioning as this mechanical machine that they are, you just can't get your hands too wide, can't get your hands too narrow, you can't get your arms reaching too far outside of your body, and you can't try to be squeezing your arms too close together, really, although getting to the center line of your body is just actually where it works the best. Okay, with Earth's vertical centered gravity pull and the horizontal surface of the Earth, right? This perpendicular angle. There's only one way the body works, I don't have an opinion on it. We discuss things like this, meaning in this depth. We discuss things in such depth under In the Image Clothing Company. You couldn't possibly dispute it, because we're not trying to decide anything here, okay? Truth is truth. Mathematical measurements are just what they are. And you just have the width of hands, the length of fingers, the width of fingers that you do, okay? And that just has to mesh nicely on a guitar, where you can just watch me. I'll just fret through some notes. The guitar is slightly out of tune, but it is what it is. what I'm saying is, you can just watch my fingers. It's like I'm just sitting here, just opening and closing my hand. Even when I'm in different chord shapes, see how my fingers right here just showing as if I'm actually fretting the guitar. My fingers are still staying at the same width apart, just right next to each other. Even if I'm in different chord shapes, my fingers are still just right next to each other on this width of a nut. For me personally, okay, 1 inch and 7/8 wide, okay, which is right here, really, at the 3rd fret on this guitar, okay. But just watch my fingers, watch them track just right next to each other. To get an idea, like I'm saying, if you're in a guitar shop, let's say, and you're trying out different guitars, you try 10, 20, 30 different guitars. There's so many guitars out there, depending on what you have access to individually, you know, where you're at on the earth and things like this. But the focus is just getting it to feel right. You're just physically moving your hands to play guitar. If you are physically uncomfortable because the physical size and or shape and or setup of the guitar, which is all the same thing really, you're not going to play well. And it's going to hurt physically. It's going to be emotionally like, you know, you're going to get all upset at the guitar. You're going to just smash guitars, you know, on the stage. And, you know, some people just do that anyway. Watch my fingers. Just track right next to each other in line as I play. I don't know what I'm going to play, but, right? Like, see, even in a C chord shape, my fingers are still just in line. They're just right next to each other, like I'm just opening and closing my hand normally. Whoa. Yikes. I don't play steel strings, like I said. Anyway, it's always just right in line from each other. And, you know, where you put your thumb is something people will tell you put on the back of the neck, or you could wrap it up over the top. Sometimes you use your thumb on the E or even the A string if you do. You know, people will say different things, but it's just about the bones of the body. You just want everything to track nice and in line. And as you can see when I play, it's no different than if I'm just sitting here, okay? I'm just sitting here, and then I put the guitar here, and my body doesn't really change, right? Everything's still neutral. I'm just accommodating for the guitar being there. And, you know, you want to just be in a nice position where you're just relaxed. And what's really going to determine that? If everything else was ideal, but the nut width was too narrow or too wide, now your hands are too narrow or too wide, and your shoulders are moving because of it, and your whole body. So anyway, there you go. There's some context, because that's huge. Okay, I've had such a hard time with so many guitars before, doing all that I possibly could with the sizing and setup of things, and you're not going to change the nut width of your guitar, because the nut width is the same as the neck width, right? And so it's not something you're going to just change unless you really did like sand down the neck width, right, and the nut at the same time. But then you'd have to change the saddle and the holes, or the, you know, tie block where the strings come down into at the bottom of, you know, at the bridge. You're just not going to really change certain things with a guitar after it's made. Certain things without doing like an immense amount of alteration to it. Okay. So unless you want to just go through a big process and try out a lot of different guitars, really, if you can do all you can to learn what you're going to need size and setup wise with a guitar before you get a guitar, then you can just, yeah, get a guitar and it can work well for you. And then you just have to learn how to play and just practice. And really just by playing is how you practice, right? So there you go. Okay, nut width on a guitar, why it's important. what I'm saying is a lot of guitars I had were much too narrow, and a lot of guitars I had were much too wide. Even though I'm as tall as I am, as big of hands as I have, as long of fingers as I have, personally, just for context, for reference, I still play about a half size to a 3/4 size guitar. And I mean, really, probably more in that half size range. Seriously, you know. But there's a lot of context to it through the whole body because it's just all about a position, you know. And if our bodies just aren't in a normal position to begin with, then we're just not going to be approaching guitars properly. And this can play into the position of our bodies and travel through the rest of our lives with damage, you know, patterning getting built up in the body, bone spurs, scar tissue, problems, pain, lasting, you know, until we figure out what's going on and address it or fix it. You know, it could be chronic until fixed or addressed. So that's a big thing, the nut width of a guitar, okay? And yeah, it's kind of hard because most steel string guitars, a lot of them, we'll say a lot of steel string guitars have pretty narrow nut widths. And a lot of nylon string guitars have pretty wide nut width. And a lot of times for just about everybody, we need somewhere right in between a lot of these like general sizes or average sizes. It's kind of funny because, you know, I'm willing to say most steel string guitars have too narrow of a neck for most people, and then, you know, full size guitars, and then most full size classical guitars. I'm willing to say that at least without, you know, knowing all the guitars out there, but I've played a lot of different guitars and watched other people play. But yeah, they're too big, too wide. For most everybody. Okay, a full-size classical guitar, just too wide. You're just spreading your hands out, and people, you see it in their jaw and in their face because the jaw is directly connected to the edge of the shoulder, and the shoulder's down to the hand, and there's just two sides to the body. There's one hand on the right side of the guitar and one hand on the left side of the guitar. It's just got to be as even as we can. It's just physics, as mechanics. It's truly mathematical measurable to figure out what guitar is going to be the best size for you, seen with the right context of having the body of yours, okay, of the human being working properly. There's no opinion to it when it comes to what's the best sizing and setup of guitar for you. There really isn't. It's something you have to figure out physical function wise, you know, sizing wise. Okay, so anyway, there's a lot of context because that's huge, okay? One of those things you can't overlook. So, yeah. I mean, you only need enough space between the strings for your fingers to be able to be there without muting the strings next to them. You get too much space and you're spreading your fingers too far apart. But if the fingers are too wide for the spacing between the strings, then you're going to have the strings hitting your fingers and you'll be muting the strings. They'll be vibrating and you'll mute them or stop the vibration by touching them when you're not even trying to touch that string. You're trying to have your finger in between that string and the other one next to it, you know. Anyway, just not touching that string. Oh man, I couldn't make up the amount of airplanes in this town. That's so crazy. So many airplanes in this area. So things like bar chords. You're never going to do a bar chord very well if if the nut width is so narrow that, you know, where the bones join in your fingers is like right on the edge of the neck. Like if this was more narrow at the nut of this guitar to the point where my knuckle of my finger, like my index finger's second knuckle, was just right at the edge of the fretboard as I was doing a bar chord across the whole neck, then I can't even have support from my finger because it'll bend right at the joint, right? So you need it wide enough. That's what I'm saying. There's so much to this. You need the nut width wide enough to where you can have your index finger, or, you know, whatever finger you're going to be doing a bar chord with, but you'll probably be using your index finger, right? Like when you cover across all the strings. Anyway, I cannot play this guitar very well. because of what it is. But you cover across all the strings with all your fingers, and you want it to just be where you can still have nice support across your whole index finger so that you're able to really press those strings down and get a clear, crisp bar chord, which is easier on nylon strings than steel strings, okay, because they're easier to press down. They're not as strong or stiff, but you want to be able to have full support across your whole finger, and then you also need to be able to not have to feel like you have to use your other finger to help you. A lot of people will make bar chords with their index finger, and they'll use their middle finger to help their index finger press down. A lot of that's just the width. If it's too wide, it's going to be kind of awkward. If it's too narrow, you're going to bend your finger across it. Because if it's too wide, you can't get your other fingers to a spot very easily to fret other notes while your index finger is doing a bar chord, because your fingers all come in and connect to the same area at the knuckles, and the middle finger comes and connects right next to the index. And so if it's too wide, your index finger is kind of stuck in place, and you're going to cramp up in your other fingers to make other bar chords, you know. If it's too narrow, you just can't have enough support, and so your other fingers are trying to support your index finger, and they can't really move independently very well. So that's what I mean when I say there's no opinion to this. What I mean is, in a beneficial way, you want to get down to the actual truth of the measurements of what's happening with your fingers, hands, shoulders, body proportions, and then the guitars, you know, proportions in all the ways: nut width, scale length, body size, string tension, style type, height or action off the fretboard, and everything in between. There's so much to it where you've got to have a lot set up properly. And so we discuss it under In the Image Clothing Company music here, specifically one of our fourths, you know, the sizing and setup of guitar. As I'm doing in this video, this is one of the big things. We've discussed this kind of before, you know, the nut width of guitars, but this is a specific video about just the width of the nut of the guitar. And it'll change your entire experience, make it next to impossible to play without cramping and pain and just physical inability to even get your fingers past each other or just have dexterity in your fingers, because your fingers just won't bend. If you spread them apart farther than just right in line, you're just putting strain on all the muscles that come straight up your forearm. Once they get into the hand bones, if you spread your fingers apart, everything just goes on an angle. And that's damaging to the actual bones. The cartilage or cushioning between the bones and the ligaments that connect the bones together, things only track just directly in line and nothing else. When it comes to the bones of the body, they're only the shape and length that they are. So that's what I mean when I say there's no possible opinion to your individual most ideal size and setup of guitar. But also, you know, for just about everyone, somewhere in that half size to 3/4 size guitar is going to be just what you actually need. Even little kids, you know, I mean, you can get down to a quarter size or as small as you would need for someone who's quite small, a really young kid or something, or just someone who's really short. Some people are just like much shorter than average too, you know, or have much smaller hands than average. Cool. I mean, it doesn't matter. That's what I'm saying. That's why I'm saying this, is because we all have our own individual ideal, like actual measurably, properly set up for our bodies individually. As I said, it's individual, man. It's individual. I feel like I'm out here preaching because that's what we do. You know, geared around the gospel of Jesus Christ, we are individual within the universal human design. So anyway, this is the point, man. 1 7/8. That's my size. That's what I'm going to stick with unless anything changes. But what won't change is the shape and length and size of my fingers, bones, and hands, and shoulders, and knees and toes. Yikes. Okay. So yeah, there you go. There's some good context, all right? And yeah, you know, a hard part about it is just the different length fingers. We've got different length fingers that wrap evenly around our different length opposable thumb that plays an entirely different function as the fingers. And so that's what I mean is we can just measure all this. We can figure out what's really happening. The weird thing about the fingers is they come flat at the tips, because when you bend your rounded fingers, you know, and the ends of them are different lengths in this rounding, when they're straight, you bend that and they all come flat. So it's kind of hard. You know, I've talked before about the necessity of a radius in guitars, but it's got to be seen with context, because a lot of it's just the degree of bend in the fingers. When the fingers are straight, they're round. When the fingers are bent, they're flat on the tips. It's crazy, man. Like the degree of depth that this goes, and the degree of depth that we get with our explanation and have with our understandings, and will continue to deepen under In the Image Clothing Company, okay? Because it's stuff like this. The fingers are rounded when they're straight on the tips, but they're flat when they're bent. So context has to be there, and there's a lot in this video, okay? So again, my name is Evan Strong. I am the founder and leader for life of In the Image Clothing Company. We'll talk about more stuff like this, just as we have up until now as well, under In the Image Clothing Company music when it comes to sizing and setup of guitars. I'm going to get another guitar here just in the next, like very soon. Again, this isn't mine, but shout out to Harmony, right? The brand. This is one of those more vintage guitars. This is quite a few decades old. Pretty cool guitar, but not what I play. I just don't play steel strings, and so I also don't play full-size guitars. But there you go. Okay, we'll talk about it. And we do, just as I've done here. Thank you, and goodbye. Check out the other 3 sides of In the Image Clothing Company if you'd like to. We do a lot. You know, we'll always have good clothing available. We've got In the Image Clothing Company Poodles, another one of our 4ths, and In the Image Clothing Company podcast, where we have discussions on the gospel of Jesus Christ. Information applying to all dogs, with letting dogs stay natural under In the Image Clothing Company Poodles. And then, yeah, just deep discussions of life in general under In the Image Clothing Company podcast. So, okay. Thank you. And goodbye.